Where are the Count of Caras? We hope you like our show.
Hello, welcome to our corner of the internet. It can't be your corner of the internet if you want it to be.
It's our corner of the internet. It's an inclusive
Everyone's corner of the internet.
Everybody's welcome to our corner.
Talking of corners, it's been 2 weeks. We've been hiding in the corner for 2 weeks, but we're back. And this was kind of a hot topic a few weeks ago. But I think it's good, that we've kind of came back to it and everyone's kind of started to not talk about it because everyone's too busy talking about that Girl Gamer game trailer that popped around Twitter.
I was going to mention that too.
Oh well, look at that fight.
We need
Thank you.
We need some F's in the chat for Girl Gamer.
What a wonderful start.
It looks like the anti-super seducer. It looks awesome.
It looks
like for the wrong reasons.
It looks like 2020 now has killed Girl Gamer, so
I don't get why everyone's being so antsy over it, other than it being tone deaf. Just move on, talk about something else. Like,
it's tone deaf, but then I've heard arguments like, "Oh, it's reflective of an actual real world problem, and they're gamifying it." And
I mean,
but then you saw a lot of ladies that came out and were like, "I don't need a game showcasing all the harassment I get on my channel. Like, this is ridiculous."
That's what I'm saying, right?
I understand that. That's where the tone deafness comes in.
It's definitely tone deaf, but I feel like because we're asking for more socially aware games and that interconnect with like real problems in internet culture. So obviously you're going to get some ones that do that well, and then you're going to get people that want to do it but kind of fail and do it. And I think this is a case of that. I don't think there's any ill intent behind it.
I just wish it was by the same development team as Detroit Become Human, because then I could have called this game Internet Become Simp.
Wow. Well,
I don't know,
speaking
man.
of that,
I guess I'm just kind of old school, where it's like, if you don't like it, don't play it.
Yeah.
I don't think it shouldn't exist, but
they got more attention.
It's a little tasteless, don't get me wrong, but
it's nothing like some of these tasteless games though that we've seen try to come out, right?
Yeah.
That have been totally shut down. It falls in a different category.
Well, I think this is, they've actually done a bunch of FMV games. The Complex was the most recent one before this. And there was Late Shift as well, and no one really gave them much attention. This one's had so much attention and comparable, so it's like all these people complain about it, kind of getting it free promo. And yes, Imptoria, they should make the game about you. Speaking of quality, small things can be quality, big things can be quality, such as myself. But game length, obviously, it's been a hot topic. Jason Schreier and a few other people on Twitter said that video games should be shorter. And that's the topic we're going to focus in on, because I don't think it's a simple case of, all games should be shorter and games should be shorter because I don't have the time. As adults, obviously we have less time as we grow up, we get tired quicker, we have jobs, we have relationships, we have pets, we have other interests. But we're gonna deep dive into this and kind of look at it as something that I personally feel the idea that games should be shorter is a little bit reckless and is pretty much a good example of why Twitter, I said Twitter there, Twitter is a good example might as well be, is a good example of why we can't have more complex and nuanced conversations with the restriction of a certain amount of characters and just how crowded and sealed off Twitter can be. And I feel like this is a good example of it. So obviously on my, well, actually I don't know, because I think my camera's inverted. So on my right we have Dust, as ever, beautiful blonde hair, glasses, look at that, this black background, and we have a freshly shaven Shao on the left. Look at that. You can smell the freshness of that haircut.
I finally look like myself. I've waited so long for this day where I can wake up and my hair isn't a goddamn mess that I have to comb over to the side.
Yeah, that's what I'd been dealing with until not this week, but the previous week. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's the funniest. I think it's one of the funniest first world problems that we've had to face.
It is. Yeah,
because it's just been horrendous. It's like, it's maddening. And you're like, this shouldn't bother me as much as it does, but damn, it does.
And
I still look like a Trump.
The point, video games don't necessarily need to be shorter, but our hair certainly does.
Well,
is that an attack? Is that an attack on my Chris Jericho ponytail here?
I love it.
Thank you.
I love it.
But let's get in the topic. Video game length. I'm interested to hear what you. I've had a little bit of a rant over this on Twitter over the past few weeks. But here we are. We're talking about it. So I would like Charles, to start off, because you're actually both of you. Both of you tend to play RPGs and JRPGs, which by default are a lot longer than a lot of the games I tend to play. I'm more of an FPS guy or an action adventure guy, and they usually clock in about 10, maybe 15 hours at the most, 20 hours. You guys play a lot of RPG, so I really want to know what your thoughts are on the idea that games should be shorter.
Let's start off because I'm gonna bridge off of what you have to say. I bet you anything.
So I will say that I jumped back into The Witcher 2 for the first time, and the Flotsam chapter, which is chapter 1 for those of you that haven't played it, goes on for way too many hours to the point where I was ready to lose it. I think my viewers were tired of it too. And it's funny because I was doing a bunch of side quests. I think I did probably 85 to 90% of everything I could have done there, maybe more.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like by the time I'm done with that, I'm at like 20 hours. And it's like, oh, I marathoned it too just the other day at 14, and I just barely got out of it. And it's like, I've already played the game, so I know the story continues to get better. I know it gets, it ramps up. And, we could probably take an hour out of there because I kept wiping on a
Yeah.
fight over and over again, which is another one of my pet peeves. Any kind of fight that you have to keep doing, and then you still lose in the following cutscene, and you're like, well, then why did I have to win the fight? The hell?
The narrative defeat.
It's that first little scrap with Letho. That fight can just eat a dick. Awful. But anyway, game length wise, though, I mean, I tend to be one that I would say my sweet spot for a game is probably
Dependence on
anywhere
what kind of
35
game
plus
it is,
hours.
TBH
And I think
RPG prefer to be
anything,
long, I
I'm
would
starting to
say, as
reach a
long as
time
the
where I'm accepting that there
story
is a
evolves and
point at which a
doesn't go,
game is
here's
way
the
too
enemy,
long.
kill
Persona
enemy
5
grats,
Royal
you
was pretty
unlock
close
the
to
end
that. I felt like
game.
there was just while I
Credits.
like the story and I like doing everything that I did, I mean, clocking in around 150 by the end of it seemed a little long.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I think one of the biggest problems with that whole chapter is not necessarily that it's very congested, but is there's a lot of combat sequences where you can be tripped up because it's still pretty early on in the game, and the Witcher 2 doesn't have the easiest combat system. It wasn't. I think a lot of people think that the Witcher has.
Personally, I prefer the first to it. I'm
Yeah.
gonna go there.
Well, I think that the first one has a more creative method. I don't necessarily know if I enjoy it more,
It's
but
janky.
I
Combat's
think
janky for
it
sure.
takes you a long time to get used to The Witcher 2's combat, and you add that to an already congested chapter, and it just prolongs it. So it makes it makes it feel longer than it actually is. At least that was my first
I
opinion.
think that's a fair point.
And I played it
Or it
both on
makes it
PC and Xbox 360, and the Xbox 360 combat's slightly different because that's the enhanced version of the game. But it's still tricky to get used to.
That's entirely fair. I'm also doing it keyboard and mouse, so maybe that's part of my problem. I did it on 360 with controller though, and now I've just done it with keyboard and mouse just because I got used to it.
I've only played it
Uh,
on PC, and that's not a game I would want to play with keyboard and mouse. Same with Witcher 3. It's
yeah, I'm not going to be touching Witcher 3 with keyboard and mouse. I don't think.
That's a good move.
I am glad that you guys brought that up though, because that sort of leads into my perspective of it, where
Witcher's
you're
also
talking.
one that I did some on.
Yeah, which is basically that the number of actual hours in the game or the actual length of the game is irrelevant. I'll be perfectly honest. Actual game length is irrelevant. The key, for me at least, is, and it's become a bit of a meme with me because it's a bit of my obsession, but I think it absolutely needs to be talked about, is pacing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
pacing is ultimately what dictates whether a game is too long or if it's not long enough or how it feels. So, like using your example of Witcher 2, it's elongated by a really bad sequence that you need to pass in order to get through the game, and it sort of arbitrarily fleshes out the game length. That's an example of bad pacing, whereas you can kind of get to that end point without needing to fill it in with busy work. And Ubisoft games are pretty notorious for this.
Yeah.
There's nothing inherently wrong with an open world. What is inherently wrong is when you have story beats that feel disjointed from the actual elements of playing the game, where the meat of the game is, go to the tower, unlock this, which works for some people, but for me, I don't find that as a compelling reason to play. So if you're talking about, oh, games should be shorter,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of games? Because my first reaction when I saw that Jason Schreier tweet was, they already are. You're just
Yeah.
playing the wrong games. We already have games that are short, are cohesive, tightly knit experiences.
And they're
Can
not
be
bad
very
because
narrative.
they're short. They're
No, not at
perfectly
all.
fine.
Not at all. And on the flip side,
Mhm.
right now I'm playing through Persona 4 Golden. I'm about 82 hours into this game. I've got maybe another like 20 left because I'm at the end of January, and I'm on the path to the true ending. I know this much for sure. Um, but I do not feel at any point that this game has overstayed its welcome. I am extremely ready to dive in and play it and keep going and going because I find the way that the narration, game's narrative is spread out over the experience and how
Mhm.
it's broken up between the actual dungeon gameplay elements and the strength of its writing makes it so it doesn't feel overwhelming. It
Yeah,
doesn't
and the
feel like
social
it's just
system's
kind of
great. It feels very
exactly.
organic. I
It
mean, it's
very organic.
obviously animated, but like
Yeah.
it feels very organic. You're looking forward to your next confrontation or conversation with somebody. It keeps
Yeah.
you going through.
It
It's weird. It's a type of grind, but it's an enjoyable grind.
yeah.
At
It
least your
Yeah.
doesn't
first playthrough.
it doesn't feel like there's content in there just for the sake of padding out game time. And that's ultimately what I mean by pacing. How well does the story progress from one beat to the next, to the next, to the next? And I think Persona 4 Golden absolutely nails it. Whereas other games that I've played, like Alien Isolation, do not. Because then that's a game that I feel is let's throw in content for the sake of content. Like that entire sequence where you do the flashback. I don't know if you guys played Alien Isolation.
Yes, it's like 15 hours too long. I've always said, sorry to jump
Yeah,
in a
it's like
little bit, but I
I'm
feel
gonna
like
give
the
it a
first
try
no, go ahead.
10
sometime.
hours are good. The first 10 hours are great. Everything
Yeah,
hits home, and then it keeps going and going.
yeah,
A little bit like the Alien series, I guess. Keeps going and going and going, and you're like, oh my god, just end.
yeah.
Just end.
So I
What game
logged in
was that I
17
played
hours.
like that? Oh, I got it. Andromeda was the game I wanted to end after a while. I mean, I knew it was going to be a meme. I got it for $20 new. I didn't get, ripped off, but there was at one point of that game, I'm like, just end already.
I'm gonna defend Andromeda because it's a little different. It falls into the same open world thing. So what you
Hmm.
get
It's
out
the
of that
open
game is
world
how
problem.
what your
Yes.
tolerance. Yeah, it's what your tolerance for it, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but that being said, the story it's generic, and
Right. I think the best
it
way to put it is forgettable story, but it
yeah,
had a decent
forgettable story,
system,
forgettable characters,
but the
great
gameplay
combat
wasn't
system,
bad. No,
great combat system.
I would have given up on the game if the gameplay was crap.
Yeah,
The rest was forgettable, but the gameplay was enjoyable, I'd say.
Yeah, but
yeah,
there's
it
nothing
was
to
streamlined.
fuel you to keep going, which is the biggest problem with the
No,
game. It's as Shao was saying, I
Hmm.
don't necessarily think that length is a problem, what she said. Uh, it's more that there needs to be something there to keep you going. So if I feel like if I'm playing a game that's long, let's say like 20 hours plus, I say anything
What
that's
the
20 hours
game?
plus is a long game. But if I feel my time isn't being rewarded, or I'm starting to get
Mhm.
frustrated with the game because of the either being pacing or gameplay loops, then
I've
I
got one.
will I will turn my mind off, and I'm like, well, I don't enjoy this, and I'll just simply move on to something else. And that's why I'm not too keen on
I
this
got it.
idea that games need to be short. I just think they need to be paced better.
I have one I gave up on because of crap pacing. Vampire.
Oh,
That
I
game
just hated
had
that game in general.
abysmal pacing. And I actually stopped streaming it because of that.
I
It
think
has
everything
other
was. I
problems,
hate
but
everything with that though.
pacing,
So I'm
yeah, but
biased.
pacing is just one more. It's one more nail in the coffin, right?
Hmm.
And pacing, I think Shell hit it on the head though. The pacing is very important because I was saying it was starting to get long, but even then I got through Persona 5 Royal despite having played Persona 5. And so Golden's going to be it's going to be as easy as it gets for me to get through that because I like the style of the games and they seem to get pacing right from
Hmm.
what I've played. Even 3 gets it right. The problem is I gave up streaming that because there's a little hidden element of gameplay padding, which is when your AI makes their own decisions and you can't control them
Oh.
directly and they get you killed. And then you
Hmm.
lose 20, 40 minutes of progress. Yeah, that's not fun for pacing as a streamer. So I've gone, you know what? I'll play it off stream. Delga!
Thank you very much, Gilga. Diving in there with these big chopping acts, but thank you very much. Welcome back to our corner of the internet, where we're currently discussing game length and Dust revealing
and girth.
Persona. Exactly, and girth. And thus revealing that horrible mechanic, which is in a few games, I think,
Wait,
where
is that a new
NPCs will fuck
icon
you
for
up.
your-
That's
Is that a new-
that's the blood handprint on the 64 for Flare.
How do you
So there you go.
how do you get that one?
You got to know some people at Twitch. That's what I'm saying. I know why Dr. Disrespect's been banned. It's because he couldn't get a Flare.
We can't say anything though.
No. But one game that Wick is actually currently playing, and you might have seen it behind me, not currently, but in previous streams, is a Kingdom Come Deliverance. And this is kind of like a love-hate game. Obviously, I love it, but I feel like Kingdom Come really managed to get the pace correct, where I feel like, because all my actions result in the progress of my character. So every sword fight I have, it increases my, my progression in that field. Every time I talk to an NPC, it increases my speech. Every time I explore stuff, I'm finding new quests, I'm finding new areas, I'm finding new little bits of lore, even just like weird, funny interactions. And I played that game on stream, and it was nearly just under 90 hours, but there wasn't at any point where I felt bored or tired, or this was the same thing. And I think, obviously I'm a little bit biased because I love my swords, I love my kind of like historic stuff, but I feel like it really managed to give you the beats of the main story while peppering you with interesting side content. And yes, there is some side content that isn't as engaging as others, but in general, it felt like every side quest let me learn a little bit more about Henry, let me learn a little bit more about the characters around me and the politics and the the economic situation of the area around me. And I feel like it's got some old school DNA, and I think this is very indicative of old school stuff, like Planescape Torment, for example. It's about 30-40 hours, right, Charles? You know more about this.
Something like
Yeah.
that.
Let me get the.
But
I'm
every
gonna actually look
my-
up how long to beat, but I
Oh.
seem to recall it being about 30 hours,
Yeah.
maybe?
I think it's a little longer.
Without exploration. Maybe less than that.
every single character I talk to, and I'm been writing something. I haven't
Main
finished
story is
it.
about 40.
About
And
40
then it says
hours.
main and extra 73. I definitely felt
Yeah, if you
the
do everything, that's what I
73
said.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
drags.
about 40 or 30
So-
without exploring
Mhm.
everything. Like for someone like me, where you kind of know where many things are. I'm
Yeah.
not even gonna say most, but many.
But I'm going in
things are.
fresh because I can't remember it. But one thing I've noticed with Planescape Torment, the more I've been playing it, is every single conversation, interaction I have with a character, I learn something new about the world that I'm in. And there's some really unique parts of that game. So when you go to the market, you can talk to a guy who will sell you food. And, it's not often that games will describe the type of food that is, that people eat in that area. Obviously, you'll get stuff that just gives you HP. But this, it doesn't actually have a role other than telling you what the kind of food is available in this market and what people eat and stuff. So, and your character's eating it, and it describes every single taste and reaction your character has to this food. And it's like, this is a little detail, but it's adding to this overall sense that I'm in a living, breathing environment. And every single interaction I have in Planescape Torment adds to my knowledge of the world, and it all feels organic. And I feel like it's probably one of the best paced RPGs that I've played in general, and especially played of late again, because I haven't played that game in like well over 10-15 years. But I still feel like it's one of the best examples of a long arm game that is very dialogue heavy, but all the dialogue feels completely intact and it feels completely relevant. It's not just guff. Am I being a fanboy with that, or?
No, I agree, because that's also from like, you can tell that it has a hangover from like tabletop gaming, where the game's playing DM and trying to describe the setting for you. And that's also why it's like one of the best written games, but it's just a level of immersion. That's like a question of immersion, and I think it's great. And it's just so well done that you kind of lose the sense that you're, basically reading a video game.
Yeah.
It feels like, it doesn't feel like it's dragging on. Which is why I liked it when you were streaming it, but then I kind of knew when you were going into it, like, that game's not going to go over well.
No.
Not at all. Unless you're like a professional voice actor and you're just there to entertain everybody.
Are you saying my voice acting is not professional? Did you hear my poopy farty homeless guy?
I'm saying that you're a professional, and I'm saying that you have a lovely voice.
Thank you.
And I'll leave it at that.
And I'm not commenting on my absence from a lot of that stream.
Wow.
But yeah, it's just, how well does the game deliver what it's attempting to do, and that's what it comes down to as well. Like its pacing and how well does it deliver it, which I guess are the same thing. But ultimately, when you have that, that's where you get the value out of it. And a lot of this discussion about we need shorter games, and this is going to become like a recurring theme on the show, that's the AAA sphere.
Yeah.
And it's very different from gaming as we understand it and how we engage with it. People point to God of War saying it's a shorter experience and it feels great. That's not an outlier, because God of War is just the latest in a series that has always done that, going back to PS2 and the PSP. Right? God of War has always been that sort of game. It's just that we live in an era now where games are shifting towards games as a service, or they're games that feel they need to have an open world, and so everything looks identical and everything feels like it's this competition for what can keep you engaged the most and, value for your dollar. And when you have a discussion about should games be more expensive, people want that value for the money they're spending on games. Whereas my argument is not every game needs to be like 90, 100 hours. You can get great value for a game that's maybe $30 US, probably 40 up here, for maybe half the length. And as long as it's paced well enough and it resonates with you, then that's not time wasted either. Or at least you shouldn't feel like, you lost out on something.
Yeah, and it's not money wasted either. Another factor that can come into play too are games with a shorter campaign, but if they have some element of playability and they're worth going back and playing again,
Yeah,
then that can
replayability is
counter.
huge.
Replayability is a huge counter. And one thing that I looked at was price per hour on games. And in this, some of you are going to go, "Oh, Dusty's going to prove it. Price per hour is proof. It's the lower the price per hour, the better the game." And I have to tell you that is definitely not true.
Oof. I have opinions about this, but Dusty, finish your thought, and then I'm going to jump
we could do The Last of Us versus The Last of Us 2, where The Last of Us was $3.53 per hour, while Last of Us 2's $2.18 per hour. And the way I did this, for those curious, is I just assumed, for the sake of this, I don't remember, I think some N64 games were 50, but for the sake of this, I put everything at 60. Took the gameplay hours main plus extras off of how long to beat, since that's kind of my style, where I guess I could have just done campaign, and then just divided, the $60 price point by that amount of hours, and then we're left with a price per hour. Now, where it gets debunked, in my opinion, is let's see here. Where's a great example? How about the Dragon Age series might be a good. Actually, no, the Mass Effect series would probably be the best. Or, well, let's see here. Where's a game you guys probably like? How about Resident Evil 4? This is a good example.
I think this is probably one of the finest paced games in terms of
Evil 4,
action.
I've never played it, so I have nothing to say about it.
So RE4 comes in at, $60 price point, 20 hours roughly. So you're looking at $3 per hour. It seems high, but it was a good experience. I haven't finished it yet. I'm going to go back and do it. That seems fair.
I'm sitting with heretics.
Now, if lower is better, then that should mean that you guys are going to tell me that Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain is better, clocking in at $60 price point, 82 hours roughly, 0.73. So 73 cents per hour.
Well, you see, with I think this is something that's very indicative of Kojima in general. Is I'm big fan of Mega 64, and Garrett from Mega 64 is a huge Metal Gear Solid fan, and he has platinumed that game. He has well over 500 hours in it, and I thought, I really like Metal Gear Solid 5, but I feel like I've always said it's like a rich cake. You enjoy it, but it's too sweet. So the more you eat, you're like, eh. So it's not that it's a bad game. It's the content's good, but the amount of stuff around each of the tasks is so padded that it requires a lot. Now, obviously, we're talking here where we're not the biggest fans of that kind of gameplay loop, but someone that loves that gameplay loop and loves that style of gameplay will play it time and time and time and time and time again. And I think this is why the whole hour, the dollar per hour thing, or pound per hour, or euro per hour, you get what I mean, is a little of rubles. It's like a cup of coffee costs like 20 billion rubles. So the kind of price to hour.
Sorry to any Russian fans who legitimately buy games. I was just joking.
I know. The price to hour math. It seems a little bit false to me, and I know that we were saying this is going to be debunked, but I think when it comes to games, everyone has like such a different taste to how they play their games, especially something like Metal Gear Solid, because there's a lot of different ways you can approach that game, and there's so much stuff you can do. If you want to be a completionist, you're going to be there till dick docks. If you want not tangible, sorry, like a bite-sized experience where you can kind of drop in, drop out, drop in, drop out, it's going to be a different end time compared to the completionist. Does that mean the game's not worth your time? Of course not. And going back to what we were talking about with The Last of Us, I feel The Last of Us gameplay in the first one isn't that interesting. I've always said that. I just like the story and the writing. So they kind of doubled down on that and made the next game double the size, but in doing so, the writing is now bloated, which then makes the story bloated, and the gameplay was never that great, and that's bloated. So I think this is a good example of I'd rather pay the same amount for a shorter game where everything kind of hits the right beat for a longer game where there's more of it, but it's just kind of stretched out. It's like it's like a poorly painted Warhammer figure. This is just for Drek in chat. Right. It's like a poorly painted Warhammer figure. I can get a big blob of paint, and I can paint a little bit of the model, and it'll look very nice. If I use that same bit of paint, I keep trying to do the full model, it's going to look like stretchy and not as good quality. And that's Last of Us 2. It's a poorly painted Warhammer model.
See, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's also my issue with the whole price per minute argument, or price per hour, because people engage with games very differently. What about the people who replay games? Most people don't. Most people will look at it as, I play a game once and I never touch it again, and that's where it kind of is valid for the first time playthrough. If you're like me, I paid, what was it? It was $6, I think, the very first time I bought Bloodlines, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and across GOG and across Steam, I have like maybe 120 hours into it, and like a single playthrough vanilla is maybe like 35, 40. So my price per hour, if you're gonna call it that, is much lower than the next person. Never mind, like, if you're talking about a game,
took me 39.
40 roughly. See, I know my shit.
Yeah. I was just checking what mine was. I couldn't remember.
Okay. But yeah, that's just that. Never mind games that have different content. For different, like, that lock content away, like Witcher 2, where you basically have an entire second game from the second chapter onwards. Never mind games that are open world and some people are completionists, right? Never mind games that offer option, like in the case of like Persona 4, optional bosses that some won't even bother to go to. I guess that ties into the whole completionist thing. Right. And ultimately, the fact that games are interactive is precisely why I think that metric doesn't work. People
I feel like that metric is suitable for like different kinds of media, like let's say film, because you can watch a film, but you wouldn't go straight back to watch it. It depends what it would be, but it's like, say, Transformers, which is like the best example of AAA. Even with film, you see,
I disagree, because here's the other thing. You can watch a film that's like 3 hours long, and if it slogs in the middle, it's a pain to get through, and you're going to be miserable because all you're doing is sitting and absorbing. You can watch something that's an hour 40 minutes. Like, I just rewatched Casablanca last week, and I love that movie. It's an hour and 40 minutes long, maybe less, maybe an hour 30, and at no point am I bored in that entire runtime. Another movie, something like Alien 3, is again an hour 40 long, and there's just so little there to be engaging. And I actually kind of like Alien 3, but there's just that slow part in the middle, where it's just not a compelling story, because then you get this like alien, and you know who it's going to kill exactly, and a kill suspension in it, because of course they're characters you're not attached to, and it's a completely different feeling. So even in something like that, where it comes down to, again, to pacing. And
I was talking more from like the quality of how long it is. So let's say Lord of the Rings, it's 3.5 hours if you get the extended cut, but it's all quality, so you feel like your money is just. But let's say if the same price, let's say of it's cinema tickets, that's like £11, maybe £13. I don't know, if I went to the cinema and I saw that, I'm happy my £13 being spent well. If I go and see a really short film, like I think The Guest is about 1 hour 20 minutes. And it's fucking great. I feel like I've still got a vindicated price. And then if I spend money on I'm trying to think of a bad long film. Avatar. I fucking hate Avatar. I hate Avatar. I felt like it was a huge waste of money. It's about 3 hours long, right? Cinema price. I go in, the production's fine, but it's so like sluggish and it just keeps like going on and on and on. I feel like, oh, okay, I didn't get my money's worth because of that. But it's not because of the time, it's because of the quality within that time limit. And I feel like this is like a similar thing we can apply to video games, but I don't feel like the metric of hour equals this value is really suitable.
Yep.
At
and
that
I
point,
think
we can agree then, because I misunderstood what you were saying. But then we're on the same page on that one, because it's not the
Yeah.
amount of money you put into it; it's what you're getting out of it.
Yeah.
And when you're coming down to different tastes as well, then now is the question: how much value does that dollar have to one person or to the next person?
Mhm.
Mhm.
I do not like survival games. People and I don't like survival games. I like Subnautica.
Yeah.
It's a good survival game, but it's still not my thing. It's a survival game. Someone else will get way more value out of Subnautica than I will. Just like I'm gonna
That's
get
fair.
so much more value out of like Baldur's Gate than someone else will. So
That's a good point. Yeah, and there definitely is a sweet spot. I don't know what it is. I think there's definitely a limit that if a game is under a certain amount of time, it's going to be a waste of money.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know what that number is. It might be 3-4 hours, maybe.
Well, I remember the
again,
Order
it's like when
1886.
it
If it
depends.
has no
I,
replayability
Yeah.
and it's like 3-4 hours,
it
and it's
depends
not
what the
well
game is.
paced, I guess.
But the Order 86, I like that game a lot. It has problems, and it feels like it
Mhm.
could have done a lot more. Like, it sells itself on you get to fight vampires and werewolves, and you fight like two, and then it just ends. But I still enjoyed the game, so when I got it, I saw these reviews like 6/10, 5 out of 10, disappointed, and I was like, well, I still enjoyed it. It's a very short game. I've never replayed it since, but I still enjoyed it, and I don't feel like my money was misplaced, or I wouldn't say investment, because it's not investment. Okay, think back. My money being spent wasn't spent poorly, because I still enjoyed it and I still remember it this day and I still have fond memories of it. So I'm not really
Mhm.
obviously we don't want a game to be like an hour and be like £60, because it's gonna be fucking hard to measure up to that. But
Yeah, it's like super hard to justify. But I mean,
Right.
like, I'm just trying to think of like a short game that I absolutely loved.
Yeah,
Here's,
after a certain
here's the
point,
problem with
though,
playing
like,
role playing games is that very few of them are short.
yeah. But I'd
Um,
say like 7 hours is probably like a really good short period. Like 5 to 7 hours you can get away with if it's done really well,
mhm.
I would say.
but yeah,
Because there are some
yeah.
great, especially an FPS campaign. I think that was one thing I was going to mention. When an FPS campaign takes 30 plus hours, it might drag a bit of that at that
Depends
point.
what it is for me, because
Honestly.
obviously I
Depends,
played
yeah.
Doom Eternal on Nightmare on stream, and that clocked in at
Mhm.
over 30 hours. And obviously, if I played it on normal, I think I would have been done in about 15 hours, because it's a long one. But
Mhm.
because of the difficulty setting, again, this is why this kind of equation of how much a game is worth
Right.
do the hours, because obviously if I'm playing harder, it's going to be harder to play. I'm going to die more when I'm playing the same sequences. But because the gameplay loops are so on point, the enemy design is so brilliant, and just the overall functionality and flow of the combat is so amazing, it doesn't feel like a drag to continuously play it. Hence, and we see this in other games like Dark Souls. You can be someone that's really good at Dark Souls and finish it within like 10, 15 hours, or maybe like 6 if you're super good at it. Or you can be someone that's new and struggles, but you're still enjoying it because it just feels good. And the narrative in Dark Souls is so disconnected. You have to kind of do the legwork, and most people aren't willing to do that. So it's not like the narrative is pushing them; it's purely the gameplay. And I would assume for most people, I say this because this is why I like them games, is the idea that I am facing this challenge that I have no advantages over, and when I defeat it, I feel satisfied. Doesn't matter if I spent a day, an hour, 3 days, 3 weeks trying to beat that boss. It still works for me. But someone else, and we saw this with Dark Souls needs easy mode type of people. And I'm not talking about accessibility, for
Accessibility
games.
is different from difficulty.
Yeah, this is a completely different argument. I'm talking purely about the people that said the game needs to be easy for people that don't want the challenge. I don't like that, because I feel like that, one, changes the DNA of the game, and two, it would make the game so short to the point where the next argument would be is Dark Souls is too short. Because if you're really good at them games, you can pretty much hammer one out in a night. So I feel like, again, this is a good example of why this metric of how long a game is equals this price point doesn't really work out, because it's too different. It's completely
Mhm.
different from point to point. And it's just, as I go on in a long-winded rant once again,
Right. And there's all sorts of different playability styles, right? So
Yeah.
we have our
Right.
standard way of playing a blind playthrough. Some people speed run and play a game over and over again. Some people do no hit runs or no damage taken. It's insane.
Some people will just
See, like,
PvP.
I'm still on the fence
So it
about
adds a
that one
bunch.
because I'm always like, I like player choice. So if it has an easy mode, then yeah,
Mhm.
you're just giving people who want to get into the game a means to do it and kind of build them up to like the quote unquote normal mode. But I do also understand that that kind of defeats the whole purpose of what the game is intending to be in the first place. So I don't know, I'm of two minds. But I do agree with you that as soon as you add that, then you'll get the argument that, well, it's a bit too short
Yeah.
and, I didn't get my money's worth.
And I feel in terms of because obviously the influence of the Souls like series is everywhere now. And I think one of the most recent examples of it being a bad thing was Star Wars, the Jedi Fallen Order. I know this game did well, but I personally felt like it was so bloated and just went on and on and on, where I felt like the game was too long. And on the flip side, people were praising it because it's a long game. So now I find myself on the other side of the argument where I'm like, well, it's too long, and I don't think the quality of the pacing, the writing, or the gameplay, because there's not much gameplay in there. There's not much variation. The first few attacks you have from the first 2 hours, you have until the end. There's really no change. And this is because they're trying to be accessible and other reasons. But I find myself in the other end where I'm like, well, this game's kind of too long, and then people are praising it for its length being just right. And this kind of highlights that, we all have different ideas of what is a quality game, and this is how long it should be, and this is what I want from it. So this is why we're discussing this whole topic of games are too long when it comes from people that are in pretty big places of influence, and developers listen to these people. And I feel like this is a little bit of a reckless statement to be parroting around social media and writing articles about.
Right, but and at the same time, I can kind of sympathize where it's coming from. Like, you're an adult, like, and we're going back to Schreier. He just had a kid. He's a new father. He's got his babe. So I get it. Like, your time is limited, and you want to play these games, but you want to finish them, presumably. But you can't do that. The other side of it is we're also talking about a person who probably hasn't had to buy a video game in a very, very long time. Or if he does, he's very selective with what he buys.
Yes.
Now, that kind of brings into question of value. If you're not paying for the game, then how does that affect your perspective of whether or not it's too long or too short? It's very easy to say, well, it's too long if you don't have any money invested into it either. Now, I'm not saying that for context, he did say this about Last of Us 2. I think he said that he paid for it, which is fine. But for argument's sake, how do you apply that same metric to a game that you as a reviewer get as part of a review code, or if it's something that's gifted to you, or because you're in the industry, you have access to these things?
I can give some insight to this because obviously I've been writing reviews for a while, and I had this with Greedfall. And Greedfall, obviously I didn't pay for it. And one thing I've always found that I personally struggled with is how, because I don't do review scores. I don't like writing review scores. There are review scores on Monster Vine, but usually it's quantified by the editor. So they'll read and they'll figure out a score, and then we'll discuss, okay, we agree with that. But I prefer not have review scores. I find it to be just I don't think it's productive, because people will just scroll through a 2-paragraph, like a long review that covers all the main points, and just look for a score at the end. So one of the biggest challenges is you sit there and you think, all right, well, I didn't pay for this game, so I don't feel like, my time is edged on a dollar value or a pound value. So you have to kind of put yourself in the position. And this is where I kind of mention, well, if you're a fan of, let's say, in terms of Greedfall, if you're a big fan of the Witcher series, The Witcher 3 specifically, or the new kind of direction of Assassin's Creed, and you feel like, you like a little bit of length with your action gameplay, then this is a game for you. If you're after something a bit more shorthand, then maybe it's too long for you. And it depends from game to game, and it is a tricky part of the reviewing process. But I do think you have to sit there and be honest with yourself, and it can be difficult. So, for example, with what do you got? Freedom Finger. Freedom Finger is about 3-4 hours long. It's $15. And I give that a positive review, a very positive review, because I thought the amount of time you can get out of the game for the price value was wonderful. I didn't pay for it, but I was able to dissect, well, you have this amount is the core campaign, this is your replay value, and everything on top of that let's put in the soundtrack. If you want to listen to the music and play around with the game, I did that plenty of times because there's some really good tracks in there from bands I didn't know. So I really play it for that. So you kind of have to like chop it up. Now I can't say for how they do it, of course, because I feel like mainstream media have kind of, when I get a review code, there's still a sense of me being humbled and honored to get it. And I can't say if that's particularly true for the likes of people that work for Kotaku who are getting like free stuff like press kits, which are the biggest load of bullshit around. I'm going to tell you now, I've worked in games marketing. If you get a press kit, we're just trying to get you a positive review. We're just trying to impress you before you play the game. And there's some big fancy press kits out there from the likes of Sony, etc. So I do have to wonder what their idea of price value to game quality is. I feel like at this point it has to have been tainted.
See, okay, I'm glad you brought that up because I kind of do the same thing in my reviews as well. And I feel the same way. Whenever I get a review code, especially if I get a cold email saying, hey, we found your channel, would you like to review our game? And I've had a few of those. I am always very grateful, and I will try to go out of my way to review it precisely because I feel, honored. It's like, oh, I'm somebody tiny on the internet, and you came out and approached me. But that being said, I have actually asked for review copies of games, and I've gotten them. And two that kind of stand out in my mind are Vampire with a Y and Call of Cthulhu. Not the Dark Corners of the Earth, but the
Focus Interactive one. Cyanide games, right?
Cyanide. Cyanide Focus Home Interactive. And for both of those games, at the very end, I actually said, I didn't pay for either of them, but I said at the end, and I don't do review scores either. So if you've watched my content, you know that. And I've gone through the game saying, here's the good, here's the bad, here's my final verdict, what I think about it. And for both of those games in particular, and they both happen to be Focus Home Interactive games, so go figure, I said, it's not worth the price point because I know I didn't pay for it, but then I looked at what it cost on day of release. And after going through the game, I just wondered, if I paid full price for this, how would I feel about it? And in both those cases, I felt, no, you need to wait for a sale. Both of my review scores for those games on my Steam Curator are negative, but that's only because I'm judging it on... I actually changed it from positive to negative for both, because I'm judging it on full price point. Even with the reduced prices, I still think you should get both of those on sale. Vampire, less so. Vampire, I think like you can get away with like paying $25-$30 for it, and it's okay, but you might as well just wait at this point for it to go lower. But yeah, neither of them I think are, $60 is a bit too high of an asking price for both of them. And I made that explicitly clear at the end of my video. So yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because then that's sort of how I approach it as well. And I think that with AAA or with mainstream games media, because they're in the AAA sphere and because they're so focused on going from one game to another and having limited time, they can't consider that. They need that instant gratification. What do I feel when I play it right away? The thing that we have the advantage, and maybe me a little bit more so because I do more retro stuff, is I can sit on a game. I can play it. I'm not rushing to get it out of the door right away. In some cases I am, like when I got the review code for Call of Cthulhu. I'm not trying to get out there for the metrics because I play old stuff that's been out for a while. My main thing is if there's a game on sale, I want you to find my video because it's on sale.
Yeah.
That's what I cater to. So I can think about a game, I can play it, I can take a lot of things into consideration. I can take a couple months to put a video together for it. And I feel that I'm doing an honest look through of it. It's not a race to the bottom.
I feel like a lot of detail gets missed in that. Yeah. I think specifically, again, going back to Greedfall, because one thing you do tend to do, and I tend to do, is I read reviews of the games I've been reviewing after I've had my review and it's in there and it's done. I'm not making any changes because I don't want my idea to be corrupted by someone else's emotion or taste, etc., etc. And Greedfall, I feel like it got, I don't want to say a harsh end of the bargain, but it felt like people kind of speed ran through some of it because they were missing certain elements. And I think this is something that happens to middle market stuff more than AAA, because obviously AAA, usually at a big site, you'll have someone that's given it well before embargo, if they have an embargo, and that's their project for them, so they can put the time in. But then, at the same time, the freelance market, which is quite popular with big publications now, they'll be doing a game and also writing like 4 or 5 other pieces, so their attention span is scattered. And this is another problem when it comes to game length. And I feel like a lot of the people that are in that position will value a game for being shorter rather than longer, regardless of the quality. So they can't put X amount of like 80 hours into a game that's really good. They'll prefer something that's shorter, and the review will reflect that. Even if it's not like, on purpose, subconsciously they'll do that and reflect it.
Yeah, and I bet you if most people reviewed Greedfall, because I played that game to the end, I never reviewed it, but I was very interested in it because I heard it had some pretty good writing, and it was. The last like 10 hours of that game were awful.
Yeah.
They were awful. I was having a lot of fun in the first like 2/3 of it, but then like the last 10 hours is talk to this person, talk to this person, talk to this person, go here, talk to it's just like it became this linear slog, and I'm just it completely destroyed that
I
last
saw a couple
third of the game.
reviews for that did
Yeah,
it.
so okay, but because they finished the game. Most places didn't. Most played like the first bit. Oh, the gameplay's good. It's a bit repetitive. It's like a BioWare game. Fuck off with that shit. Like, stop comparing everything to. And I get why you do it, because it's like shorthand and just it's stupid.
Yeah.
Let a game live on its
Punchy.
own merits.
I
I
feel
do
like
it sometimes
nowadays
too, but I
that's the
go out of my
difference.
way to like say I can't help it, and I'm trying to do this, but anyway.
And now when I
But
hear
yeah,
it's like a BioWare game, I just go, "Oh, so it's disappointing."
Oh.
you know what? I liked it. I did like it. I thought it was a really compelling I thought it was a really compelling world, and I liked the fact that you played a diplomat, so your hands were kind of tied, and like
Yeah.
you had to play nice with people. You live in a reprehensible system by today's standards. But you also have to value your alliances in this weird world that's obviously rooted in a colonialist fantasy, which it was a really compelling setting. But yeah, in terms of length, a lot of people didn't finish it. Now, Dust, you said that you saw reviews that said the ending was terrible, but
Or
were
they
they
said that
mainstream outlets?
no,
Yeah,
it
there
was
you go.
definitely a YouTube review, and I'm gonna look through that game. Maybe that'll be one of the ones that I look at putting a review together on if I finish it. We'll see.
Well, your opinion's been corrupted now, so.
Haha.
Yeah, I know, right? Great.
One game
There are a
that
lot of games.
I remember getting some criticism for being short was Deus Ex Mankind Divided. And that's because the story was, I think, partially rewritten towards the end, or at least a good chunk of it was rewritten, and then content was cut and story beats were cut. And yeah, you can tell with both Deus Ex games because they chop bits out for DLC, which is a bullshit practice, but that's an entirely different topic. But I still feel like my money was more than returned to me in quality. And I remember reading these reviews because this is why I didn't write reviews for that game, and I was like, okay, it sounds good, but maybe a little bit too short. I'm still gonna buy it because Deus Ex. I'm gonna buy every Deus Ex game apart from that one on the mobile with the guy from Godzilla. But
That's on PC now.
I know it's terrible.
Yeah, I can't wait to play it.
But when I sat there and finished it, and by the end, I never had this idea like, oh, that was short. I was like, wow, that was actually a really well packed start, finish, middle, end. Okay, great. What's the problem? Yeah, there was some noticeable bits chucked out for obviously DLC, but I still felt like the price point was pretty good, and I wasn't sure what the reviews were frankly talking about. But I think this is kind of highlights, and we've mentioned this many times, a disconnect between consumer experiences and how the media views something. Because obviously, if your job is just to review games, and for many people in that line of media, it is. I feel like it's easy to become jaded or build some kind of unintentional disconnect from the consumer, which is why YouTubers fill that space and Twitch streamers fill that space so nicely.
But there's also a disconnect between people who can kind of just go for whatever AAA game comes out and people who explore past that scene. So like there's a
Absolutely.
level of disconnect between all these kind of different elements within games, which is why we do our show, because we fill in one gap of it and we kind of talk about things that not everyone else might be talking about.
Well, it's important to diversify where you get reviews from. Don't just go like, even if you don't like Kotaku, I still think there's value in going to Kotaku and reading a review, because it's usually a conflicting opinion to what you're used to. So, for example, if I go and watch like 5 YouTubers, I'll probably get 5 different views, unless it's like some guy who's like a FaZe clan. He's like, "Well, the new Call of Duty guys, it's so fucking cool, yeah." And you go to the next one, he's like, "It's fucking cool, okay? Activision sponsored this." It's like, Okay.
Yeah, for me, it depends on who. Like, there are some authors that I don't particularly like and who I know whose opinions I very much don't like and disagree with, so I just tend to avoid them. But, like, I don't really avoid publications. Obviously, I
Yeah.
subscribe to everything as much as I can. Like, so.
I think that's the best way.
Yeah, I mean, that way you get, like, viewpoint out of it. But then again, I'm
Meanwhile,
also,
I'm the
like,
one that
not
avoids
connected
it
to the
all.
AAA scene, so, what do I know? I go through, like, word of mouth and, like, smaller YouTube reviews more than anything.
And on that note, buy Islanders.
By Islanders, it's very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you
But
want to talk about value for money, Islanders is woo!
it was like £1.19, and it's limitless. But
Well, like, if
Dusty,
we're gonna talk about other games,
I
like
see
Darkest
Dusty in the
Dungeon has
corner
filled in
there.
that void for me.
I see Dust in the corner, and nobody puts Dust in the corner. I'm expecting him to say something about a Japanese RPG. Because the Japanese RPGs, to me, are probably the best example of length equals questionable quality. Dust, have you got any examples of this? Is there any Japanese RPGs that just don't fucking end, and there's nothing to go on?
Final Fantasy 13. Although that's not super long. But you're begging for that game to end, though. In my case, anyhow.
Well, I think
That's
it's a good
one where-
example, then.
I've heard 15 is one where people are begging for that one to end. That it could have been so much more, and they didn't focus on what they needed to. I can't say much more since I haven't played it yet. I will at some point.
Mhm.
But there's not too many I can think of. I can think of one that was too short. I know that's crazy, right? One that was shorter and yet so lacking. Like, I loved it when I first played it, but then no, revisiting it, it did not. It doesn't pass the litmus test, and that would be Infinite Undiscovery. That does not.
Is it the
That
360
doesn't
one?
bode well. Yes. It
Ah.
was great when I first played it, but like you go back and like I'll be streaming it and people are like, "Oh my god." It's like the same vocal lines for certain abilities over and over again and you're like, "Oh my god." One I can think of though where length definitely wasn't quality. It just came back to me. Valkyria Revolution. The spin-off in the Valkyria Chronicles world. The spin-off is absolute garbage. Do not play it. If you can, just avoid it. It's terrible. Maybe I'll go back and play it and get some gameplay and show people how bad it is. But it's one that I'd almost rather not give any spotlight because it's just that bad. And
You know what?
it's funny because the story was great. Gameplay's terrible. Each character has the same 3-swing rotation every time you press X on your PlayStation 4 controller.
Sounds quality, Dust.
Every once in a while, the audio loops for their attacks. It's great.
You know, one JRPG that I think I wish that I wish was longer?
Shoot.
Chrono Trigger.
I can agree. I haven't played it yet, but I've heard it's great. And then I looked up how long to beat. It's like what, 17 hours?
Yeah, a little longer if you do the bonus dungeons to level everybody up. Plus with all the replayability, like the multiple endings and all that.
Yeah.
Most people like think, and I remember Pro Jared talked about this in his review of it. It's like, yeah, and you ask people how long is it, and they'll say like 30 hours, 40 hours. It's like not even 20.
Yeah.
And then I kind of realized that it's like, wow, like
I
that
think Legend of
it does dawn
the
on you that
Dragoon was
it's not
short
quite as
too.
long as people think it is.
That's
Yeah, and it just
insane.
plays beautifully. I wish
Yeah, I've
that
heard
there was
nothing
kind of
but
like
good
an
things.
extended. Yeah. It's beautiful. So I mean, again, but that's a delivery. That's like why the game was just delivered so well. That's why it feels, you know.
Yeah,
Well,
it definitely doesn't overstay its welcome. If anything, it leaves the party a little too early. And it's not in a
Yeah.
bad way. It's just it leaves you wanting even more. You're like, oh man, I don't feel like I got ripped off, but I would have loved more.
Yeah.
I had to stop playing it because I had the 3DS version, and it was starting to fuck my eyes because there was so much text to read and things popping up, and I was like, I'm sure this is great, but for now, I'm gonna stop. But on that
The 3DS
topic,
version is probably one of the best ones because it has the
the
most content in it.
the new
So.
3DS version, I think there's like 3 new 3DS games, which was only playable on the fancy version of the 3DS with the black spine games. But speaking of like handheld games usually get a bad rap for length. But I remember the GBA having a lot of games that were very long-winded, and I mean that in a good way.
Golden Sun.
Exactly,
Golden Sun was
a favorite.
awesome.
It's
Oh, I love Golden Sun.
and it's not too long. I feel like I think it clocks in. Let me check. I think it clocks in about 40 hours. Right, if I remember rightly, it's around 40 hours.
22 main story.
22.
So same as Chrono
Wow.
Trigger.
That's a good
Same
one.
as Chrono Trigger. 22 main story, main plus like completionist about 27.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah.
I felt like it was a little bit longer. Maybe it's because I replayed it a lot.
There we go.
But I feel like it was one of them games that it's a Japanese RPG, obviously, and because it's on a handheld, it hasn't got any like ridiculously complicated. Got there in the end. Imagine me finding it complicated to say complicated. There we go. It hasn't got any like long-winded systems like a junctioning from Final Fantasy VIII. It's just very simple, cookie cutter, but in a good way. I think it's one of the best examples of simplicity being the best way forward. But the length and the pacing, and especially how they introduce the dinges, because that's like the big bread and butter of that game. Is that's how you kind of formulate your tactics and approach the game. It supplies you these dinges, and there's like a number of core ones which you will get through the story, but also hidden ones. And it's like an organic way of increasing the game time because you want to find them because they're usually behind a puzzle or a tricky fight, and it doesn't feel like forced Ubisoft pattern style content where it's like, oh well, go over here and you'll find something. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's more, oh, I want to go over here and find something.
Yeah.
And it really gives the sense of pacing where it just hits the beats. It's especially similar to other JRPGs, which I find to be the best examples of well-paced ones, is Lost Odyssey. I think that's about 54 hours. There we go.
Linko.
Yep.
I'm already ahead of you.
Dusty's on the ball.
I was gonna bring that
Look
one
at
up. It's perfectly
Mhm.
paced, and they could have even added more, provided it hadn't been padding, and it would have been fine.
Yeah.
If they could just match that pacing. Honestly, the only complaint I have about that IP is that they never made a second one.
And it's not on Windows 10.
Yeah, bring that to PC. You know what? I will settle for no sequel if you guys just get it on PC.
I'd pay full
'Cause
price.
more people need to experience it. I don't even care if it's just a remaster. In fact, that'd be better. Don't remake that game. It was fine.
Another
Make it
Japanese
PC, let
RPG,
more see it.
Final Fantasy IX. I love Final Fantasy IX, mainly because it's not too long. I think compared to other Final Fantasy games, I know this is probably going to get me some hate, but I think 7 goes on a little bit too much. And that's one of the reasons why it's not my favorite. It kind of just goes on. It feels like
Classic of the remake.
I've not played the remake. I won't be playing the remake. I don't care enough. But the original classic
Seven's
release
overrated.
of Final Fantasy VII, I feel like it's a decent game, but it's like the first few hours is like the first part of a good album, and then it goes to the B-sides, and it's just like, oh, this is why you didn't release this. It's like a main single, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. I'm like, okay. And then Final Fantasy VIII does the same thing. Got some real good high points, but then it just goes on and on and on and on, and then you remember junctioning, and you're like, fuck, and on and on and on. Meanwhile,
And
Final
then-
Fantasy IX just kind of hits.
My boy, I
really
was just
wanna
gonna say,
play
and then everything was corrected when Final Fantasy IX came out.
It just hits everything, and then by the time where it feels like it's coming to crescendo, it does, and it's like, wow, imagine that, a game that builds up to a climax, and then there's nothing after the climax. Beautiful.
No.
It wipes itself away, and it's like, thank you, bye bye. I'm like, okay, bye bye.
And then you go back to like Persona 4, where the game's like 80 hours long, and then it adds another 20 or 30 to it.
Yeah.
Because which again, and that game's made me a fan of the Persona series. This is my first Persona game, and I'm familiar with Shin Megami Tensei. I haven't played any of them, but I just got a few other games to play when I've done this.
Persona 4 was the same for me. Never played Persona, but I'm a fan of it after 4, and I have played 5, but
I'm enthralled by this. I don't know if I'm gonna go. I think I'm gonna go to 2 next. I'd like to try the Persona 2 duology. Maybe not right away because I have videos to make that I've been slacking on. New video coming out next week, hopefully. So, speaking of game length, this one's an hour long. Thank you, Nightbot.
But in terms of like game length in general, I quickly want to mention something we slightly touched upon with FPSs. Obviously, FPS is like my kind of bread and butter. SWAT 4 is something that is very short if you play on easy, because the difficulty doesn't actually change. It's the amount of points you need at the end to progress. So if you're on easy, you can go in and shoot everyone. It doesn't fucking matter. You can shoot a hostage, and it doesn't matter. You'll still succeed because you're on easy. If you play on elite, you need to have like, I think it's 90 or 95 above, and that's where it gets really tense. So suddenly this game that can be complete in a few hours if you play on anything under normal Sorry, even if you play on normal, it's pretty easy. But if you go anything above, it adds a whole different element to the game. You have to be tactical. You have to be conscious of where doorways are, which doorways lead to corridors, which can lead to other doorways, which lead to more people with guns, where the civilians are going to be, what kind of gear you've got, where Ghoul Team is, where Bravo is, where Red Team is, and it adds all this like extra game time. So suddenly, going back to what we were saying before, where hours equals quality. SWAT 4 kind of starts this kind of linear path, and then you change difficulty, and it goes bloop, and just goes everywhere. And
it gets very niche at that point, where it's a good thing too, where it can either be as kind of run and gun or as immersive and tactical
intense
as you want it to be.
You're in my way, sir.
Oh, we got the Spoonie memes coming in.
And we gotta do an episode on him.
We do. And I think Doom 3 is another one. I think Doom 3 is poorly paced. I have to say this. I like Doom 3, but I do feel the pacing is quite poor. And then you compare it to 2016, and even Eternal, where the pacing is very much on point. I think Doom 3 and Doom 2016 are similar length, but Doom 2016 feels like it just glides towards it, where Doom 3 is a little bit of a stumble down the steps.
Do you think that's because of the approach, because of Doom 3's intentionally slow pace?
I do, but the slow pace, because, again, going back to horror films, I'm a big fan of, like, late 80s horror films where it's not about what you see, it's more about the build-up, and then they'll give you a quick glimpse at something. And Doom 3 does something similar where it builds tension, but at the same time, I feel like there's certain parts of that game where it's a lot of busy work, and this could probably be down to them wanting to show off their new fancy game engine, so they want to show you as much as possible. And that's where, sometimes tech demos don't make for the best games, as we saw with Assassin's Creed. Everything looks pretty, and it's like, oh, look at all these cool new things, but as a game experience, whatever. So, yeah, I think that's a fair point to make.
Yep. Or like Far Cry, same thing. The first Far Cry.
Yeah. Before the mutants come out.
That's a
game length. Do I see Kingdom Come Deliverance behind me? Or behind you?
No, it's Minecraft.
That's not good.
Wick's building the castle in Minecraft, not Kingdom Come. Dusty, the fuck? I mean, we got a little Henry here. There we go.
It almost
little
looked
Henry.
like the main menu. Look at that.
But no, that is Minecraft, good. Dusty. That's Minecraft, which is another example of a quality. Minecraft
and you can't put a timer on that one.
Yeah, and the reason why I bring this up is I just want to find an excuse to talk about Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild's main campaign isn't that long, but I've had that game since launch, and I still haven't finished it because every time I go in, I just play the game's mechanics. Because it's a very mechanic-driven experience. So I'll, make rafts, I'll explore places, I'll do stupid shit in that game. And I feel like you can't really give that equation that a lot of people seem to be talking about when they say, oh, games are too long. Because you're just allowed to play. It's just a game where you play, It's not something where you're timed by a narrative experience or some level of linearity. It's just something you play. And how do you put you put a price tag on it because it costs 60 quid, obviously. But in terms of like social media discussion, how do you put a price tag on that? I don't think you can. How do you put a quality of time, like how many X hours equals this quality? I don't think you can. And this is why I'm not a big fan of this games are too long. Even though I understand it, I just don't like this whole approach. And especially when we live in an age where you can go on websites that will tell you how long a game is. There's Twitch streams, there's YouTube. You can the information's there. It's just you have to look for it. If you're going into like a Ubisoft game like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, it's going to be fucking long. So, just play the main story and get done.
I don't know how hard it is to put this into your browser, because that is a great resource.
Yes, this is a good resource.
For those of you
it's not perfect. It doesn't say how long you'll spend necessarily, but you can get an idea.
Yeah, it's a good metric. For those of you listening on audio, Dusty just put a link to howlongtobeat.com. We all use it. It's a great resource to kind of get a sense of what you're committing to a game.
Mm-hmm.
Going off Breath of the Wild, I got really bored of that game. I would not spend $60 on Breath of the Wild, but Yeah, but I would spend $60 on Twilight Princess Remastered, which I played from start to finish, and I was enthralled. I'm an old Zelda guy. I like the sense of exploration in Breath of the Wild, but I found as a Zelda game, I really didn't like it. I like the
Yeah,
older ones much,
there's
much
something
better.
about it's funny because usually I'm one that bitches about a game being too linear, but I think Legend of Zelda hit it perfectly. Like
Right.
the linear story, like the linear path that it wants you to go, and it doesn't really you still have options along the way of little things you can do here and there, but I think it gives you that sense of purpose and direction of where to get going and what to do next.
Yeah.
And it kind of
Now,
the story unfolds and tells you kind of what to do rather than it just
yeah,
being a green arrow pointing, what you need to do.
yeah. Now the opposite of that, a game that I think you has infinite gameplay. It can be as long or short as you want it to be, but I think costs way too damn much. The Sims. Post
It
Sims
didn't
3.
used
Even
to.
Sims 3 is too expensive right now, and I have all of it, you know? The Sims, it's way too expensive because there's just so much there. And you can get as much content as you want out of that game, but holy crap. Talk about just content bloat. And it's all good content too, because it's all stuff that's usable. But like,
If you
god
could get
damn,
the
man.
game and all expansions for $60, it would be an amazing deal. But good
Sims
luck with
1
that.
Sims 1 complete not available digitally. If it ever went on GOG, I would buy that in a heartbeat. Sims 2
I'm
no
with you on
longer
that.
available digitally. You could have only gotten it if you redeemed that I Love the Sims code on Origin because they stopped supporting it. And it's not for sale they're not even selling it on Origin anymore. So I'm lucky I snagged a digital copy when I did.
hmm
Excuse me, Charles, but
Sims,
I have Sims 2 on PSP, so
yeah, but that's a different version.
I've got The Sims 2 on PC, the old good old
I'm
CD. That
talking about
was,
the
but I
real
never got any
Sims.
more.
I'm talking about the real Sims.
And the old
Sims
Sims, I
3.
have everything.
Sims 3. It's not even all the expansion packs because one of the expansion packs doesn't have the Katy Perry exclusive content. But Sims 3, 75% off on all expansion packs, still $100 for the whole kit and caboodle. On top of that, you still need to. You don't need to, but all the Sims store content. Um like that's
Is it like
another couple
240?
$1,000 for all that shit. And
Oh,
then never mind like Sims 4 during the recent Steam sale was still $600 for everything.
oh my God, that's ridiculous. I mean, it's
But at
almost like Train Simulator Junior.
the difference is with Train Simulator is that content the DLC carries from one game to the next. Every new
Oh,
edition, yeah, like
so
that's
your
mainly for enthusiasts. You're not
$11,000
supposed to.
investment.
No, you're not supposed to buy everything because the idea with that is like you buy the train model you like or the track you like, and then you
Right.
just go it and you get a piecemeal, right? Not like The Sims where everything. I know it's modular, but it all kind of feeds into each other and gives a complete
Yeah.
experience. Um, but and I say this as a big fan of The Sims, and I put like many hours into the series.
Right.
I love it, but like, holy shit, is it just I want it. I want it without breaking my bank. Anyway, yeah.
bank breaking. Video games always doing that. Well, in terms of length overall, again, insert joke here. We spoke about it a lot today, and I think we all came to the conclusion that pacing is a key thing. If a game is long, oh, what happened to Discord there? Everyone's disappeared.
You
If
were
a
the
game
one going crazy.
if
We're
a
good
game
now.
is long, it can be justified by the pacing of the story or the gameplay loop. And then sometimes you can have a game that is good in the first half, but then just never ends. So I would like to know one game which you felt hit pacing perfectly, and you might have already mentioned this before, and then one
Oh,
game
look, our images
which
disappeared.
oh, they're back, don't worry, or one game that was bad in terms of pacing and was either too short or too long. I would like to know because I have two in my head, but I want to hear you two first. I'm gonna leave mine to last because one of them I think will bring back some memories of Pacific level, which includes some two middle-aged men and their nude butts.
Okay.
You're into some weird shit, Linko. Like, not to kink shame or anything, but like,
You will see. So Dust, you're on the spot first.
All right. So a game that I think nailed it, probably Dragon Age Origins.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one did a pretty good job with pacing. I think it brought us to a great climax. We got what we wanted. There's some replayability if you want to try different things. There's some drastically different outcomes for it. So I'd say that's good. And even in the beginning, there's different outcomes for they're all linear once you realize it, but each origin story kind of has its own little twist to
Mhm.
it too. So I thought that was a great little game that it did a good job and it paced well. A game that did not pace well, I guess that one's a little trickier. But let's just stick with the series, and I'm gonna say Inquisition. I didn't finish it
Ah.
because I thought that once you got about 75% of the way through the main story, it wasn't it wasn't interesting any longer. It got very boring. And it I don't know. I don't know if it was the characters. I don't know if it was the story. It just at some point there was a disconnect. I gave up on it. The gameplay was fine, but the story was lackluster by the end of it.
I think that's a good contrast because it kind
Yeah.
of displays two phases of BioWare. I feel like I generally feel
Right.
like
I was gonna
Origins
say
was
that too.
And it's not even
the
the ugly, right? The ugly
yeah
would be Dragon Age 2, which you just want to get over with
yeah.
for a
Well,
whole other reason.
I feel like
Yeah.
Origins to me was the last truly great RPG from BioWare, and then you get
Yeah.
Inquisition where it kind of earmarks this. I wouldn't say it. I mean, Dragon Age 2 was obviously a decline, but I feel like Dragon Age 2 earmarks this new direction for where BioWare was kind of making essentially offline
Action
MMOs with an action single player structure, and then obviously we get to Anthem. You remember Anthem? You remember Anthem?
Yeah. Yeah. I
So yeah,
try. Yeah.
I
I
think it's a
almost
good
forgot
contrast.
about it, honestly. It
Oh,
wasn't
I know it's
until
still a thing. Still a thing.
it it wasn't until I watched what was it? 2019's top 10 worst games by Angry Joe where he was teasing that unicorn game as number 1 for the worst and
Secret of
then
the
ripped
Magic
it out of
Crystal.
right, right. And then he ripped it out and goes, just kidding. This wasn't it. Nobody expected this to be a great game. And then he went, what was the worst? Anthem. And I'm like, oh shit, I forgot that was this year. So yeah, that was a surprise to me. I'd forgotten about it. And now that you brought it up, I've remembered it again.
Yeah. For me, I most of you are gonna think I'm gonna say Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines has perfect pacing. It does not, because the last third of that game
It
is just a
does.
combat grind. It's a combat grind, and I've said as much.
So you're
No,
gonna say the
per-
saboteur.
no, Ooh, no. Ugh. No, perfect pacing. I said it before. I think Persona 4 nailed it, and I think that's a testament to it because, like, again, I'm 80 hours into it. I've got like another 20. I'm gonna hit 100 before this is done, and like I have not wanted to tear myself away from this game in the slightest. So I think that's a testament to exactly how fantastic it is. Um, for poor pacing, well, I said Alien Isolation was terrible. I have
Mhm.
17 hours logged into it. It should have been probably done around 12.
I feel like
Where
game
it
just
was,
peaks so early. It's a shame
yeah,
because I think it could have went down as a genuine classic, but it just goes on and on and on and on and
it
on.
is. Another perfectly paced game, Silent Hill 2.
Ah,
Silent Hill 2 from start to finish, um, like it only has maybe 3 or 4 major areas. You got the hotel, you have the hospital, you have the cabin, and you have the prison, right? About 4 minus like going around through town. But that just felt flawless. Flawless, right? And I played through that game several times, and it just feels so good. At no point do I feel like, all right, I'm ready to wrap this up. And it builds tension and dread the appropriate amount of time. It's awesome. Um, yeah, so I would put like those. Another poorly paced one. Yeah, I agree with Inquisition. Definitely, it was dreadful. It was single player MMO that went too long. Kingdoms of Amalur. I
yeah.
think that pacing for that was not great because it's the same problem. Um, you know, a little too light on content, a little too you know,
Both
flaky.
interestingly with the MMO design philosophy.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
eh,
I'm not trying to think of a. I mean, my worst game, and I've kind of went to the opposite area where you guys have went for something that went on for too long. I think that's something that was far too short. And I mentioned this. It's that big scene with two middle-aged naked men with their butt cracks out. A lot of squatting as well. Kane and Lynch 2 Dog Days.
Oh
Ah, you forgot about that.
no.
And interestingly, this goes back to what I was talking about reviews, because this was the first game I ever got a review copy from in terms of a AAA. And I remember, I feel so bad. I was playing this game, I played the first level. My friend seen I was playing it, and he was like, "Oh, I'll go out and buy it, and we'll play co-op." And I was like, "Oh, sure." So I didn't pay for it. He went and played full price. We played it that evening, and we were done within 4 hours. He spent £40 on a 4-hour game, which did absolutely nothing. It had one cool feature where it was kind of supposed to look like a camcorder footage, so it's like kind of distorted, and it worked well. But in short, it's very fucking short. The story never really reaches anything. It never really sets off. There's no real gameplay elements introduced, and it's a shame because you would think after the first Kane Lynch, which I don't actually hate. I think the Kane Lynch series has a lot of potential, but it's always kind of made down by its length and its clunkiness. Because I like them kind of gritty crime stories when it's two like detestable characters. Yeah, I always like the multiplayer as well. I thought the multiplayer was cool as fuck, but we just focus on the single player. And just as you think the Kane Lynch 2 story is getting somewhere, they run onto a plane, and the credits roll, and you're sat there like my first reaction was literally confused. The credits just roll. It's a little bit like the Sniper 2. If you remember the stream for the Sniper 2, the final part is, and we never saw Gabriel again. I don't know who Gabriel is. Gabriel is a guy. He just appears in the last level, and apparently you never see him again. That's the end of the game. And I'm like, oh, okay. And Kane Lynch had the exact same effect on us. You walk onto a plane, and the credits roll. I'm like, oh, okay. So that's my choice for poorly paced, because there is no pacing in that game. And also a good example of the length being a huge detriment to the game because the quality somehow didn't match the 4 hours. So, yeah. In terms of games I feel like really nail the quality, and especially pacing, as before, I mentioned Kingdom Come Deliverance. And this is another one that's kind of like a little bit of a surprise because I don't want to choose something that you would expect. Warhammer Space Marine, I feel like it enters, it hits the middle, and towards the end, you just start to think, is this starting to get a little bit too long? And then it ends on a cliffhanger. You're like, wow, heresy. See, and you want
like
more.
When they introduced the Chaos Marines, it was like, oh, this is a bit of a different enemy. But then you realize, same tactics, really. It's not really. They're just different bullets. They're just like bigger bullet sponges. And yeah, the ending was unsatisfying, man. They did my boy Titus a dirty at the end.
It's a dirty one, but it makes you feel angry at the Inquisition because they fucked our boy over, and it makes me want a sequel. And it never happens. So I gotta sit there and I'm like,
that's what I mean. Like, okay. They did your boy Titus a dirty at the end. And here's the other thing too, and I think this is where Linko and I differ. I think Ultramarines are my favorite chapter, so I was especially pissed at the end because they got the raw deal.
Orcs boys, you're the best boys. That's what I'm gonna say. That's the one part I don't like about the game is killing my green brethren.
Ultramarines are best chapter. Fight me.
But I have to say, I did enjoy the overall pacing of Space Marine because I feel like it doesn't outstay its welcome. And in terms of like a typical pacing, I feel like it hits.
I think I've got
it
one
comes,
we all agree on too.
What is this, Dust?
L.A. Noire. I think it nails the pacing.
100%.
I think 100%. It totally nails it.
Good pacing, but I don't like the game, I have to say. Because of the lack of consequence. I feel like the lack of consequence really detracts my enjoyment of the game.
If you take it like a point-and-click adventure game, like, I'm not expecting my choices to make much of a difference. They're just different routes to get to the same ending. Because really, the criminal is the criminal. Like, whoever committed it, you're trying to find that. That's the problem with the detective story. And the consequences... I don't think that's a game that absolutely needs consequences, but it should have different directions to get to the end, and it kind of does. I wish it did that a little more, but I think the story from like chapter 1 to the end, great conspiracy, great story. Like, I played through it twice, and I loved both times. It's awesome, absolutely awesome. But yeah, I agree with you, Dusty, on that one.
And what about Fallout 4? Oh, fuck that game.
I can't comment.
You know what's funny? I'm not gonna like it. I always get to where you got to pick one of the sides to side with for the ending, and I'm just like, I don't know what to do, and then I start over. I haven't finished it. It's just not. It's not great. No. What can I say? Like, the DLC is better than the game itself, and that shouldn't be the case. That Far Harbor DLC is better than the game.
I know a game that doesn't have very good pacing, and I'm gonna
here we go. Plot twist.
Crucified for it. I'm gonna get crucified for it. Divinity Original Sin 2.
Oh.
Ooh.
See, I've not actually played it like all the way through. I've played about 15, 20 hours. I haven't played all the way through, so maybe I'm missing the last big turn.
Where does it get bad, Shell? Because I don't think its
Right after
pacing
you
is
get-
bad the whole game.
I only got off of Fort Joy. I have 43 hours in the game.
Fort Joy is really bad for pacing. As somebody who's
Well, I
played
got
there
off
way
of
too
Fort
much.
Joy. I'm on the next area, and I thought that was even worse than Fort Joy. And here's
yeah,
why.
that place slows
Now,
down.
I don't like this game. I'm gonna say that right off the bat. I do not like Original Sin, mostly because I hate the combat. Not because it's turn-based. I can deal with turn-based combat. It's the armor system, and we talked about this on a previous episode.
Right,
Yeah.
the
I don't
first
like
one
this
didn't
game.
have the problem that the second one does.
No, and I
So
hate,
just to
I hate
recap the
way-
problem, it's the armor is different for magic defense, right?
Right,
Yeah.
you have
Magic
right, so you
armor,
have
you have-
armor
you
and
have-
magic resist.
Yeah,
And
magic resist
sorry,
armor and health.
Mhm.
Right, and then you have basically combat that where you're always outnumbered and it's already slow because it's turn-based, and now you have to like match your party members to, optimally take out either this person or that person, and I just find it to be very irritating and not very fun at all. And maybe I'm just bad at it, but a tad too difficult, even on normal difficulty.
and
Though,
because you're
I mean,
outnumbered, they can hit you with CC, and then that slows
Everything.
it down even more.
Exactly. So I don't think it's a me problem, considering I played role-playing games. Anyway, I found that because of how open the areas are, normally this wouldn't be a bad thing, but because there's no level scaling, everything feels like it's just so out of reach. Like I've gone to encounters, I'm like, oh, this seems like an interesting story hook. Oh, psych! Just even though it's like a few feet east of where you land, it's too high of a level for you, so we're just gonna crush you in this combat. Hope you saved a little earlier than that. And there's no sense of like guidance to where you can take quests to level you up so you can get to this other stuff. It's just such a mishmash of so much stuff and not knowing where to go. And
It's a case where scaling ruined the pacing, or a lack of scaling ruined pacing.
Yeah, and I'm not even that big of a fan of scaling. Like you can have stuff that's higher level, but just section it off and highlight that this is an area that you need to go through. Like the way Gothic does it is great. You have enemies that are hard to kill, and you go in that direction and you'll get slaughtered, but then you also kind of get warned that if you're going that way, you'll
You're
see it.
gonna
Expect
die.
a bad time.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of bad times, so I think we can agree that the idea that games are too long is a little bit of a reckless statement.
I've also got a controversial one.
Oh, all right. Well, one final plot twist from Dust, and if it sucks, we're just gonna kick him out with the call.
Okay. I would say good pacing, Oblivion. Bad pacing, Skyrim.
I don't know about that.
Worst.
I
It's not
disagree.
the worst, but I think
I
that
disagree.
I'm critical of Skyrim quite a lot of the time, but I still like the game. But I feel like
Oblivion,
Skyrim's fine.
I can
I think
temper it
that
and
neither
say
of them are bad
Oblivion's
either.
good pacing and Skyrim's all right, is what I
don't
would
think
temper it.
I don't think either of them have bad pacing because they're
No, I was
designed
saying
specifically for you to
Oblivion's
explore.
good.
No, I know. I'm saying neither of them are
Okay.
bad. Like both are
Okay.
good. I think
Okay.
Skyrim it follows in the same kind of idea that that Oblivion does, and just explore it at your own pace.
That's fair.
On that plot twist, we're gonna banish Dust to Oblivion. Look at that, he's gone. Let's bring him
Before
back.
I get banished, Dragon's Dogma has kind of rough pacing.
All right, he's gone again for insulting Dragon's
No,
Dogma.
you had your chance. You had your chance.
But no, I think we can agree that the idea of the games being too long is a little bit of a reckless of a statement. I think it kind of separates you from responsibility that you should be able to have when you're looking at a product. I don't think, people seem to tend to not really research their games as much when they're buying them. You can find out how long a game is roughly. And if a game is too long, then guess what? There's so much choice out there. You can find something that, adjusts your time scale or how many hours you have to play. But overall, I think our lasting points are, one, pacing is key. A game can be long, but it can be wonderful in justified hours, as with, I said, Kingdom Come. Dust and Shal both said Persona, which I think is a good example because everything you do in that game kind of rewards your time input. So it's a good choice.
Yeah.
And then some games which, the originals might be short, with The Last of Us 2, they kind of become bloated Last of Us 1 and then become bloated Last of Us 2 because they try a little bit too much and maybe the pacing doesn't justify it, the writing just doesn't justify it. So, I mean, and that's even before we get to how different people play. So the idea of games being too long is, I think we can agree, a little bit of a reckless statement and not very indicative of where we are in terms of video games.
And price per hour is a bit of a dumb metric.
Yeah, don't use price per hour. Don't use price per hour. It's not a good idea.
No.
Any closing comments, Mr. Shal on my left? The freshly shaven Shal on my left. How about that for a tongue twister? Freshly shaven Shal.
I still got a beard though. Yeah. So going forward, if you want to catch VODs of this podcast, I will be hosting them on my channel as well as on Linko's channel. So, if you want to see what we talked about previously, you should go ahead and subscribe and check out, previous episodes. Should have a new video coming out next week as well, so that's another reason to subscribe.
What's that video on, Shal?
I'm not telling you.
Can you give me a hint?
It's a surprise. I tweeted about it. I made a comment about it.
It's Honey Pop.
No, it's not. I made a little bit of a hint about it when I tweeted about working on a video, but you know what they say, can't plan too much and it might not come out right.
So look out for Shal's FIFA 16 review. Dust. Any closing comments?
Anyway, I
beautiful blonde.
Thank you all very much for joining us. Just want to say that too. I want to thank the people. Now go, Dust.
Yeah, thanks again, everybody for being, part of our corner of the internet today. Hope you had fun. Hope you had a good time. In my case, I guess it just all comes down to, the price per hour metric. Throw it out. It's not worth it. If you want to know hours, how long to beat, or there's other resources. But just know that gameplay length isn't going to necessarily equate to, enjoyment level. If you want a short game and you don't care about how good or bad it is, go play The Quiet Man and then tell me you want to play a short game. There's other short games you could play that would be far better. So keep an eye out for games that, and at the same time, just because there's hundreds and hundreds of hours in a game doesn't mean you're going to have a good time. Now, Persona's the exception, not the rule, but there are others where that's the case. You don't want a game that's like Vampire the Masquerade or like Greedfall in terms of pacing. Vampire the Masquerade's still amazing. You should still play it. Greedfall's still pretty good, but if there's bad pacing, though, there's bad pacing, right? So
that's true.
So it comes down to pacing, your own preference, and honestly, your genre preference is very indicative of what you're going to enjoy for a game, I would imagine. I can't imagine many people liking a Medal of Honor or Call of Duty campaign that spans like 50 plus hours. I couldn't imagine that. So meanwhile, nobody wants a 5-hour JRPG. You're going to be very confused.
Actually, if you want a 5-hour JRPG, Cthulhu Saves the World. And Breath of Death 7. Both of them are excellent, like 5-hour JRPGs. Well worth it. And very funny games too.
Awesome. I stand corrected. They do indeed exist. I still don't recommend trying to prove me wrong, though, with that 50-hour Call of Duty campaign.
It's coming. It's coming. It's not what Warzone is anyway. Well, thank you, Shal. Thank you, Dust. My closing comments are don't ever buy Dragon Age 2. Buy Islanders. Many copies of Islanders. You can have like 6 copies of Islanders when Dragon Age 2 is on sale. You can never have enough Islanders. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Oh, Dust
what game also has bad pacing?
Life has bad pacing.
I was going to say Girl Gamer, because it probably won't come out now.
Oh, it's going to come out. It's going to come out, and that's what Shal will be doing a review on. But yeah. Games aren't too long, but maybe you haven't got enough time to play the game that you want to play. I think I might be discovering that soon with Ghosts of Tsushima. I'm very interested in that. Hopefully I can convince Wick to play it, so we'll see. But anyway, thank you everyone for joining us on our corner of the internet. The 2-week gap, we were having a holiday. Dust was in Cancun. Shal was... Where were you, Shal? I think you said you were in a Welsh caravan park, I believe.
Yeah, near...
Yes.
Somewhere around there.
And I had a nice, lovely weekend in Serbia. It was beautiful. That's how I got this beautiful time. But
did you
go
to Serbia?
No, I did not go to Serbia.
Okay, good. I'm joking.
But thank you for joining us. On the count of 3, I want us all to say one game that we can think of that was on the Wii. You have to just one game on the Wii, could be anything. All right, ready? This is gonna be our sign off. 3,
Okay.
2, 1. Hell's
Wii
Kitchen.
Sports!
Silent Hill Shattered